There we go. What we'll do is we're going to talk through some of the ingredients of making the perfect pint. There's only 4 ingredients of making beer. That's water, barley, yeast and hops. So it should be fairly easy to make beer, and to be quite honest it is. And the reason why it is basically for the work that these scientists that was on before us here have done. So what we'll do is we'll go through each of the ingredients, we'll explain their part in it and what it actually does to the beer. Well, the first ingredient we have up is actually water. Very basic, makes up about 95% of our beer. For every pint of beer that you actually make, it takes about 10 pints of water to make that pint. So why is water so important to beer? Because it's, like I said, it basically makes up the best bulk of our beer. Also, what we need in it as well, we need to know what our water is. First and foremost, we need to know that it's safe. So with people like Sarah, who are off trudging through fields in our Irish weather during the winter time, trying to gather up samples, we said, thank you very much for it. So we know our water is safe. You wouldn't believe it, up to this generation or the last century, back in the 1900s, people drank more beer than they did water. The reason for that was beer was actually safer to drink than the water. Where today, thanks to all the samples, the testing that's done, we actually know that the water is safe. So that's the first thing we need to know in order to make beer, that our water is safe to actually use. The next thing we need to know is the hardness in our water. You know, in Ireland here, some people in different areas have hard water, soft water, whether your kettle have a scale on it, whether it doesn't. That's hugely important again when we're making beer. Different types of beer that we make are synonymous with, excuse me, I think I should take some of this. The different types of beer that we have are synonymous with the water that we have as well. In Ireland, we're famous for the Stokes, and one of the reasons for that is because the water that was in Dublin at the time was actually hard water and was more suited to stouts. Whereas if you go to places like Vienna and Germany, they're more famous for their pilsners, their light lagers, because they have soft water. Now, in order to mimic that these days, what we can do is we can add sodium sulfates, salts into them, and we can mimic that these days. But first, we need to know what our bases are. So that's why a lot of the importance is in our testing and the work that the scientists actually do before we get our water. The next ingredient we use is barley. Now, when I say barley, we don't strictly use barley in it. What we use is malted barley. So what malted barley is the barley that comes from the farmers. It actually goes to a maltsters. Now, in order for it to be suitable for beer again, we have specific parameters that we need for it. In order for it to make good beer, it has to have low nitrogen, it has to have high protein, it has to have a certain amount of colour in it, and it also has to have a certain amount of moisture in it. Now, it's hugely important, and it's one of the big areas that Teagasc work with farmers to get. Because if a farmer produces malt that's not suitable for malting or for distilling, it's actually only worth about half the value too. So there's a lot of work goes in there to make sure that we can get the right strain of yeast in there, to get the right flavours, the right colour in our beers as well. We take malt, what the maltster does, then he takes the grain in there, they basically soak it in water, they heat it up, they drain it, heat it up again with water over a couple of days. What happens there then is that the grain thinks that the seasons are changing, so it starts getting ready to go. So it starts converting everything into proteins, into fats, into sugars to grow for the season, is what we want. When it gets to a specific level again, then they raise the temperature very, very quickly and arrest any more development in there. So what we end up inside there is just a small little grain of sugar that's in there. Now there is some samples down at the back down there. If you're around later on, you can taste them and test them as well. Taste them and test them and tell me what you think of them. There's different kind of varieties of it that'll give different flavours. Now, as I said, if we were to just take that one malt and make beer out of it, every beer that we would have would be the same. So in order to do different things, to get different flavours, to get different colours, what we'll do is then they'll take that malt and they'll start burning it slowly. So what they'll start doing is burning the sugar that's inside there, and what that'll do then is it'll change the complexity of the sugar that's inside there. So in order to get it, we'll take it, we'll make it roasted a bit on a higher temperature, so you'll start burning the sugar, you'll get kind of a biscuity flavour in it, you'll get a roast flavour in there, you'll get a different colour in there. So it'll do that the whole way through a spectrum from A to Z, which we can use, and it'll give us different colours, different flavours in it. Again, we have samples down there. You can taste them. Some of them are very, very light. They're full of sugar. Other ones down there are very, very black. There's no sugar in them because all the sugar has been burnt inside them. But what it does give us is a flavour of bitterness and coffee flavour. We have roast flavours in there. You'll get these from the malts as well. So the next ingredient then we'll use is hops. Now, as everyone in Ireland knows, you see these growing all over the place. Every village in Ireland have hop plants around the place. But the one thing we can't grow in Ireland here. The reason we can't grow them, or we don't grow them, is one, is probably not economically viable, because up to a couple of years ago, we probably had 4 breweries in the country that probably only used 3-4 different hop varieties between them. Nowadays we have 70 to 80 craft breweries in the country, and between them they probably use 90, 100 different varieties. So it's probably not economically viable to grow it here, and also we don't really get the temperature. In order to grow hops, we need to have sunlight from May to September on an average daily basis of about 15 hours in order to grow them. So we import all our hops. And yeah, you know how likely that is in Ireland to get 15 hours of sunlight right through from May to September. So in order to get our hops, we import them from all over the world. Now again, with hops, the work that's gone into it beforehand takes absolutely years to develop. As Donald was saying with the potatoes when he was growing there, and he was explaining that from day one, when they decide that they're going to trial a new potato, it can take up to 15 years before they can actually have something to come to market. It's the same thing with hops. The hops that we're using today have been developed over the last 10 to 20 years. So what we're drinking now, the styles of beers that's popular now, had to be tried to think of them 15 years ago so as they could start seeing the change in them. And as people know, with the change in craft beer, it's rapidly changing every couple of years. Up to about 6 years ago, we brought out a beer in Ireland which is called an IPA. And the first time people tasted it, they said, oh, that's very strong, that's never going to take off. Nowadays, that's considered mild for the flavours that they're taking now. Now we have all different types of beers. So the problems, or the challenge, I should say, for the hop growers is to keep up with the ever-changing markets that's in there. Like the beers that you see coming through nowadays are sour beers, they're full of flavour, they're all about the hop flavours in there. So it's going to be one of the challenges over the next couple of years, is actually trying to get as many hops as we can. Over the last couple of years, there's been a race to catch up again with hop supplies, because if the weather is bad, if there's a shortage in one area, it can wipe out whole plantations of hops, and that leaves a big shortage of a market. So you have a growing market chasing a very small amount of hops that's left there, and it can be very challenging for brewers and for the growers as well over it. So the next one, the final ingredient that we have is yeast, and it's probably the most important ingredient in it. And the funny thing about it, up to relatively recent, people didn't even know that was in beer. When the Germans brought out the Reichstagen law, which is their laws of purity, they actually only had that you could make beer out of 3 ingredients: water, barley and hops. They didn't actually know about the yeast or what it done in beer. What they did know was that if you took some beer from your old product and put it in with the new batch, it would kick off your fermentation. And what they used to actually call it was God is good. It took a fella called Louis Pasteur, I think he was a scientist, to actually discover the strain of yeast that was suitable for making beer. He then promptly designed a way to kill it as quick as possible in his pasteurization units. Now the yeast, like I said again, it's something that's been developed over years through scientists, through trials. Again, when Louis Pasteur identified the yeast then, and there was only one that we had in there, and that was all, and that was the only strain of yeast they used for years and years. Nowadays you can get up to 10, 15 different strains of yeast that'll actually change your beer and change your flavour as well. For the likes of ale yeast, you use a low fluctuation yeast, ones that settle out quickly and give you a nice pint, a nice clear colour as well. They're called low fluctuation, and they're very important for different styles of beer. Whereas if people are familiar with wheat beers that you get in Europe, when you pour them out, they're very, very cloudy, and you get a kind of a peppermint flavour off them, a banana flavour off them. But them flavours all come from the yeast, and that cloudiness is in there, specifically designed in it so as to stay cloudy for a lot longer. So now we have all the ingredients that we need to make a perfect pint. So now what we're going to do is we'll make the perfect pint. We'll start off, we have our water, we'll pour in our malts into it. Now what we need to do is convert the sugars that's inside into a sugar. We want it into a liquid sugar, which is called our wort. So what we'll do is we'll raise the temperature slowly over about an hour and a half, and what we'll do is we'll break down the DNA that's in our sugars. Now the reason we know this, again, is from work like Donncha earlier with the DNA, we know how to break down and what temperatures affect the different sugars. Because if we just put it down one temperature, we'll only break down a certain amount of sugars in there, but we'll have to do it at multiple temperatures in order to break it all down into a liquid form. Once we have that done, then we'll transfer it over into a kettle. We'll boil it up there. The reason why we boil it up was twofold. One is to kill off any bacteria that's growing in there. It'll sterilise the beer there because we'll boil it for about an hour and a half. The other is against the isomerge, the hops that's in there, to break down the hop flavour that's in there. The hops, although these are pellet form, they're normally grown in a small little flower about that size, and about 99% of that plant is actually useless. We're only looking for the 1% that's in there, which is the oils that's in there, the alpha acids, and they grow very much in the stem in there, and they're very hard to break down. So again, the temperatures, the 100 degrees temperatures that we get to will actually help that, and that will impart both bitterness and aroma into our beer. So we put in our yeast in there. We'll leave it ferment for maybe 3 or 4 days. We'll measure the amount of sugar that's in there versus the amount of alcohol that we're getting out of there. Now the yeast in there, what it'll do is it'll eat the sugar in there and it'll secrete alcohol. So over the number of days, what we'll see is we'll see the amount of sugar falling down, but we'll also see the amount of alcohol rising with it. So when it gets to a certain point that we have our alcohol here and our sugar levels down below, we'll know that all our activity is done in there. So then what we do is we'll bring the temperature down to about 1 degree very, very rapidly over about 10 hours or so. And what will happen then is the yeast will have nothing else to eat in there. It'll settle down to the bottom of the tank. We'll take that off, we'll crop it, we'll use it again in the next batch. We'll then drop off whatever else then that we don't need, and we'll leave it settled there and condition at 1 degree for about 3 weeks. Again, it's a hugely important step to leave it conditioned, because what you have is you have a series of wild yeast that's in there, will go around, look for something, anything at all to eat in there, and it'll lead up all the phenols or the proteins in there and condition and clean up the beer. So we'll end up with a fresher beer at the end of those 2 to 3 weeks. So now we've made the perfect pint. We're going to make three lovely pints there that everybody's going to enjoy. We'll pour the 3 of them out. We'll say, there you go, have your perfect pint. Well, there's 2 other people to drink with them. One will be Donald Trump, the other Nigel Farage. How do you think that's going to taste? You have the perfect pint there now. It's made with all the best ingredients, the right way, but you have to drink it with these 2 people. So now we go back to Emily earlier and perception, or sensory. So it's not just the way you make a pint, the ingredients that you use. It's down to where you are, what you're doing, who you're with, that you'll get the perfect pint. People, I've heard it here even this evening, a lot of people go on holidays. They might go to the south of France, they might go to Spain, northern Italy, and they're sitting in some countryside cafe or wine place and sitting outside in the veranda, lovely weather, and you have a bottle of wine, and it's the nicest bottle of wine you've had. And you come home 6 months later, it's October, it's raining out. You're down in Tesco's and you see the same bottle of wine and you say, oh yes, I had that wine on holidays, it's absolutely lovely. And you bring it home and it's like soap water. It's all down to sensory. So again, we do have, like I said, the scientific work that's gone behind the beers that we make. help us make our beers easy. We have essentially how you enjoy your drink, and again, we free samples. So thanks very much.